What if your life was at risk and the only person capable of saving it refused to help? Lucas Martins just wanted to be treated by a doctor, but what he found at the hospital was contempt. Neglected and humiliated by those who were supposed to protect him, his fight would not just be against physical pain, but against a system that saw him as a problem, not as a human being. Lucas Martins was an ordinary man, one of those who led a simple life and dedicated himself to work. However, on an ordinary night, his life took an unexpected turn. Returning home after a tiring day, he was surprised by an intense pain in his chest. At first, he thought it was something temporary, perhaps accumulated fatigue, but, as the minutes passed, the pain became unbearable. Breathing heavily and sweat running down his forehead, Lucas soon understood that the situation was serious. He knew he couldn't ignore that warning from his body and he needed urgent help. With effort, he got into the car and drove to the nearest hospital. The path that had always felt familiar now seemed eternal, every beat of his heart echoing like an imminent threat. Upon arriving at the hospital, he was greeted by a crowded waiting room. People with tense and anxious faces waited for assistance. However, the pain in his chest made Lucas feel like time around him was slowing down. He approached the reception, begging for help. Every word he said felt like a desperate effort, as if the air was being stolen from his lungs. Nurse Camila, a young woman with a tired face, attended to him at the reception with a slight smile, but her look betrayed the rush of that night. Lucas tried to remain calm, even with the pain in his chest intensifying with every second. She directed him to the waiting room, promising that he would be seen soon. The surrounding environment was cold and impersonal, with scattered people, lost looks and muttered conversations. But Lucas couldn't focus on anything other than the growing pain. Minutes turned into hours as he waited, his heart beating wildly, fueling his anguish. Finally, Camila returned and called him into the exam room. Lucas felt a small relief when he imagined that he would soon be under medical care. As he was guided into a room, he realized that the cold white walls reflected his own vulnerability. Camila tried to comfort him with kind words, asking how he felt. "I'm not okay," Lucas said, his voice weak and hesitant. "The chest pain doesn't go away. It feels like my heart is about to explode." Camila made a note in the chart, but there was something in her eyes, a hesitation that Lucas couldn't decipher. And then, the door opened. Dr. Moreira, a man with a rigid and unreceptive appearance, entered the room. He didn't seem worried, and what happened next made Lucas even more apprehensive. Without looking directly at the patient, Dr. Moreira asked coldly, "Chest pain, is it? And what do you think it could be?" The voice filled with disdain. Lucas, already in agony, realized that something was very wrong at that moment. The cold and distant treatment would only be the beginning of a much crueler situation. The cold in the exam room intensified with the silence that followed Dr. Moreira's question. Lucas, confused and still with the pain gnawing at his chest, tried to respond with a choked voice. "I don't know, doctor, it sounds serious, I just need help." Each word was an effort, as if he was running out of air. Dr. Moreira looked at him for a few seconds, his eyes traveling Lucas up and down, but with a distant, almost disdainful look. He then made a careless gesture with his hand, as if he were getting rid of an inconvenience. Chest pain can be several things. A lot of times it's just stress. Have you ever seen your family doctor for something like this? The callousness in the doctor's tone hit Lucas like an unexpected blow. He felt something was deeply wrong, but the doctor's lack of urgency and empathy left him vulnerable and in disbelief. Dr. Moreira barely looked at him, already consulting another file on his clipboard, as if he was more concerned about the next patient. "I can't wait," Lucas said, the pain now becoming almost unbearable. "I need an exam now. This is not normal." The doctor sighed, irritated. "I have patients with more urgent cases, Mr. Martins. If your history doesn't show anything serious, this may not be a priority." Go home and see how you feel tomorrow. If it gets worse, maybe we can do something. Camila, who was watching the interaction with an uncomfortable expression, tried to intervene. Dr. Moreira, maybe we should make an electro. But before she could finish, the doctor cut her off with a harsh gesture. Camila, I decide what is needed here. Lucas looked at Camila, feeling increasingly helpless. He was there, begging for help, but Dr. Moreira seemed determined to ignore his pain. Lucas's anguish increased with each second. He couldn't believe what was happening. His life seemed to hang by a thread, and the man who was supposed to help him, Dr. Moreira, was about to dismiss him as if he were a nuisance. A feeling of helplessness came over him, mixed with a growing fear that his condition could be fatal. Please, I can't leave like this, Lucas begged, his voice louder than he intended. Despair showed in every word, and his body shook with the intensity of the pain. I'm saying something isn't right. I feel like something serious is happening to me. Dr. Moreira looked down at him, with an expression of irritation. You're being dramatic. I can't waste my time with exaggerations. I've seen this kind of thing many times. Go home and rest. And if you really think it's something serious, look for another hospital. Dr. Moreira's words sounded like a sentence of abandonment. Lucas didn't know how to react. He tried to get up, but the pain made him wobble. Camila, the nurse, took a step forward, visibly uncomfortable with the doctor's coldness. Dr. Moreira, he is clearly going through a critical situation. We should at least do proper screening, she insisted, her voice controlled but full of concern. However, the doctor did not relent. That's not my problem, Camila. I already said what I had to say. Lucas felt a wave of anger mixed with his pain. You have no right to treat me like this, he shouted, emotions running high. I am a human being. I have a family. I just want to be attended to. Dr. Moreira just crossed his arms, indifferent. If you want help, go look elsewhere. The silence that followed was piercing. Lucas felt even weaker, physically and emotionally. His fight to be heard seemed in vain. Lucas left the exam room with a heavy heart. Each step seemed to carry with him the physical pain and emotional weight of what he had just experienced. Dr. Moreira's rejection was not just a negligent medical act, but a deep emotional wound. He was completely lost. The pain in his chest continued to throb, but somehow the feeling of helplessness seemed even more unbearable. Camila, the nurse, followed him into the hallway. There was something in her eyes that suggested regret, as if she, too, was trapped within that merciless system. Lucas, wait, she called in a soft voice, but full of urgency. He stopped and turned around, anger still pulsing through his veins. What is it now? I won't stay here to be ignored again. I need help, and I'm not going to find it here. Camila bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable. I know this wasn't right. It shouldn't have happened this way. But please don't give up. You need to look elsewhere for help, or do something to ensure your voice is heard. I'm sorry about all of this. Lucas looked at her for a few seconds, trying to control the storm of emotions that consumed him. It's no use anymore. Nobody here will help me. I was treated like a problem, like my life had no value. The nurse watched him leave, frustration and desperation clearly etched on her face. Deep down, she knew she couldn't do more for him, not right now. Lucas left the hospital, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. The night air was cold and sharp. As he walked to his car, the pain in his chest persisted, but a new pain settled in his heart, that of having been rejected by a system that was supposed to protect him. The hospital, which should have been a refuge, became a place of humiliation. Lucas didn't know who to turn to, but he knew one thing: it couldn't stay like this. While Lucas left the hospital, Dr. Moreira remained in his room, apparently indifferent. But, behind the cold and professional facade, an uneasiness was beginning to form. He had treated Lucas' case as something trivial, dismissing it without hesitation, but that man's expression of pain and despair seemed to cling to his mind, like a shadow that could not be ignored. Dr. Moreira was always a respected doctor, known for his competence and experience, but he had become insensitive over the years. The exhausting routine and weight of daily decisions created an emotional barrier between him and his patients. For him, it was easier to see people as problems to be solved, or discarded, rather than as vulnerable human beings. That night, as she reviewed reports from other patients, the image of Lucas, the desperate cry for help, the plea for dignity, wouldn't leave her mind. Am I exaggerating? He asked himself silently. Or was this just another routine case? Over the years, Dr. Moreira has become a master at justifying his choices. Patients came and went, and he rarely thought about their stories once they walked through the door. But something about Lucas's face deeply disturbed him. Maybe it was the way he stared at him, like he was begging to be seen, to be recognized. The silence in his office seemed heavier than usual. He got up from his chair, went to the window and looked out at the city. The distant lights brought a superficial calm, but inside him, a storm was brewing. Should I have done something different? He asked himself. And there, for the first time in a long time, Dr. Moreira found himself questioning his own convictions. The man he had become didn't seem so safe now. But admitting that would be opening a door he's always kept locked, the door of empathy and responsibility. While Lucas faced physical and emotional pain, his wife, Anna, already sensed that something was wrong. He had left the house hours before, mentioning only that he needed to go to the hospital, but the prolonged silence and lack of news left her anxious. When he finally heard the sound of the key in the door, he ran to find it. Lucas entered the house exhausted, his face pale and the expression of someone who had been through a battle. Lucas, what happened? Did you get assistance? Why did it take so long? Anna bombarded him with questions, visibly worried. He shook his head, the pain in his chest still throbbing, but the feeling of helplessness was even more intense. They didn't help me, Anna. The doctor simply refused to help me. He said I was exaggerating, that it was nothing serious. Anna stood still for a moment, trying to process what she had just heard. Disbelief took over his face. What do you mean he refused to serve you? You had chest pain. This is serious. How can he just ignore it? Lucas sat at the kitchen table, his hands shaking. I begged, Anna. I said something was wrong, but he didn't even want to listen to me. He sent me away like I was a problem. As if my life didn't matter. Anger began to build inside Anna. As a dedicated and loving wife, she knew she couldn't let this go. That's not right, Lucas. He can't treat people like that. Let's do something about this. And what can we do? Who will listen to us? Lucas asked, his voice full of frustration and tiredness. Anna approached him, her expression hardening with fierce determination. Let's seek justice, Lucas. We can't let this happen to other people. If he didn't answer you, he's probably already done this to others. We will fight, for you and for everyone who may be suffering in silence. Anna's determination gave Lucas a glimmer of hope. She wasn't willing to let this go, and he knew that, by her side, they could fight against this injustice. It was time to act. Anna wasted no time. The next morning, she was determined to turn her outrage into action. While Lucas was still processing what happened, his wife picked up the phone and started making calls. First, she spoke to a lawyer a friend had recommended. He then sought information on how to file a formal complaint against the hospital and Dr. Moreira. We can't let this go, Lucas, said Anna firmly, while writing down the details of the conversation with the lawyer. He cannot get away with denying you the care you needed. This is negligence, and we need to fight to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Lucas was still hesitant. He had never been involved in anything this serious before, and the idea of facing a hospital and a respected doctor seemed like an impossible battle. But who will believe us, Anna? He is a renowned doctor, known in the city. What do we have against him? Anna stopped for a moment, looking deeply into Lucas's eyes. We have the truth. And that is more powerful than any reputation. Furthermore, we know we are not alone. We have already spoken to other people who have gone through similar situations. We're going to build a solid case, gather evidence, and he'll have to answer for it. Not only was she willing to stand up to the system, but she was also willing to expose the injustice that so many others could be facing. Anna believed that if they managed to make the situation public, more voices would join theirs. In the following days, the couple began to mobilize friends, family, and people from the community who had already complained about the care at the hospital. With each new story, the picture of negligence and disrespect became clearer. Lucas, still dealing with physical pain, began to feel a new type of strength, the strength to fight not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been treated with neglect. Anna, with her tireless determination, became the leader of this movement. The search for justice was now underway, and with each passing day, more allies joined the cause. With Anna's help, Lucas' story began to circulate in the community. It wasn't long before more people came forward, sharing their own experiences of neglect at the hospital. What once seemed like an isolated injustice now revealed a systemic problem. Reports of medical neglect, racism, and discrimination came from all parts of the city. Lucas wasn't the only one who had been treated with indifference. Anna, always organized and determined, began planning a demonstration in front of the hospital. The idea was simple: bring together all the silenced voices to demand change. With posters and banners, people prepared to show that they would no longer accept being treated as invisible. This isn't just about me, said Lucas, as he helped Anna assemble protest materials. It's for all of us. No one should be turned away from a hospital. Everyone has the right to be treated with dignity. Anna smiled, proud of the strength that Lucas demonstrated. Yes, and we're going to make sure they know that. The day of the demonstration arrived, and Lucas, despite the persistent pain, was on the front line. The square in front of the hospital was filled with people holding signs demanding respect and equal care for all. Justice for Lucas and health is not a privilege were some of the phrases that stood out in the hands of the protesters. Among the crowd, Anna saw Nurse Camila. She was there, also holding a sign, visibly uncomfortable with what had happened. Approaching Lucas and Anna, she greeted them with a look of solidarity. I needed to be here, Camila said, her voice full of sincerity. What happened was wrong. I'm sorry I couldn't do more at that time, but I'm with you now. Lucas squeezed his hand, feeling the support network grow. Thank you, Camila. It means a lot to me. The demonstration gained strength. The voices of the crowd echoed through the streets, and the eyes of the hospital staff, including Dr. Morera, finally turned toward them. What began as a plea for help had now turned into a fight for justice. The demonstration in front of the hospital brought palpable tension to the city. Lucas's case, which once seemed to be just an individual experience, had become a symbol of resistance against the negligent healthcare system. Local news began covering the event, and Lucas' story spread even further. Dr. Morera watched the movement from his office window, trying to remain calm. The noise from the protesters outside grew louder, and he knew that, sooner or later, he would be forced to deal with the consequences of his actions. For years, he had remained emotionally distant from his patients, justifying his actions with the pressure of hospital routine. But now, with so many people rising up against him and the system, his excuses were starting to lose steam. The hospital director called an emergency meeting to discuss the impact of the demonstration and possible actions to be taken. Some doctors defended Dr. Morera, saying he had always been an excellent professional, while others began to question whether his insensitivity was reflecting a deeper problem within the institution. In the midst of all this tension, Anna and Lucas remained firm. The demonstration was just the beginning. They knew that the hospital would try to minimize what happened, but the presence of so many protesters showed that they were not alone. "This will end up forcing them to take action," said Anna, with conviction. "They can no longer ignore what happened to you, Lucas. Not even with the other people who were treated with disregard." Lucas, although tired, felt the strength of that union. "I never imagined so many people would come together for this. It's strange, almost like my pain has turned into something bigger. Something that can really make a difference." Camila, the nurse, joined the couple. She brought news of the hospital's internal discussions. "The administration is feeling the pressure. They know they can't sweep this under the rug." As the demonstration continued, the community's voices grew even louder. The confrontation between those fighting for change and the hospital system that was closing in on its own defense was just beginning. And Lucas, now, was no longer just a rejected patient, he had become a symbol of resistance and the fight for justice. Dr. Moreira sat in his office, his head full of thoughts he couldn't shake. The echo of the screams of the demonstration outside seemed to invade his mind, bringing with it an avalanche of doubts and reflections that he had long avoided. In recent days, he had heard more stories from patients like Lucas, people he had neglected over the years, treating their pain and fears as inconveniences to be dismissed. But now, confronted by the growing movement, he felt trapped. For the first time in a long time, Dr. Moreira could no longer ignore the weight of his actions. He had built a career on coolness and efficiency, but that came with a price, the dehumanization of his patients. And the figure of Lucas, of his pain and supplication, haunted him every moment. Without anyone noticing, he watched the demonstration from his window. He saw Lucas in the center of the crowd, surrounded by people who shared the same pain and frustration. And there, for the first time, Dr. Moreira allowed himself to feel shame at how far he had strayed from the essence of his profession. That same night, he couldn't sleep. The conversation he had with the hospital director still echoed in his mind. "You need to deal with this, Moreira. The pressure is mounting, and this situation could destroy your reputation." But for him, it wasn't just about reputation anymore. Something inside him had changed. He realized that it wasn't just about what people would think, but something deeper, what he thought of himself. The next morning, Dr. Moreira made a decision. With a heavy heart and a restless mind, he picked up the phone and made the most difficult call of his life. "I want to meet Lucas Martins," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I have something to say to him." It was a small step, but perhaps it was the first towards his redemption. The demonstration had shown that silence was no longer an option, and Dr. Moreira knew that, in order to change, he would need to face the consequences head-on. Lucas and Anna were at home when the phone rang. Lucas answered without haste, imagining it would be another one of the countless messages of support they had received in the last few days. But the voice on the other end left him silent for a few seconds. It was Dr. Moreira. "Lucas," said the doctor, hesitantly, "I would like to speak to you. I know you might not want to hear me, but I need to apologize. I was wrong, Anne. I can't go on without doing this." Lucas, surprised by the call, exchanged an uncertain look with Anna. He never expected that the man, who had treated him with so much contempt, would seek reconciliation. The anger and pain were still present, but something in his tone suggested that this conversation could be a turning point. With Anna's support, Lucas decided to accept the meeting. They arranged to meet at the hospital, in the same place where the neglect had occurred. When they arrived, the atmosphere was different. The room, which had previously felt cold and inhumane, was now filled with emotional tension. Dr. Moreira was waiting for them, visibly uncomfortable. "Thank you for coming," the doctor began, bluntly. He looked smaller than the confident man Lucas had encountered days before. "I made a serious mistake. Not just with you, but with many patients. I let my ego and routine keep me from what's important, taking care of people. I was negligent. I was cruel. And I know that saying sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know that I'm sorry." Lucas watched him in silence. The physical pain he still felt in his chest was now mixed with emotional confusion. Dr. Moreira continued, visibly struggling with his words, "I want to change, Lucas. I want to learn to be a better doctor, a better human being. If you give me the chance, I want to help make this hospital a place where no one is treated like you were." Anna, always by Lucas's side, shook his hand. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to process what he heard. "Dr. Moreira, what you did caused me a lot of pain, not only physical, but emotional. I felt helpless. I don't know if I can just forget about it. But, if you really want to change, I'm willing to listen to you. The system needs to change, and that starts with people like you." Dr. Moreira nodded, his eyes filled with guilt and relief. The first step had been taken. The road to redemption would be long and difficult, but being there, in front of Lucas and Anna, was the beginning of a transformation. Lucas's journey wasn't over yet, but at that moment, he realized that his fight for justice had begun to create change. Not just for him, but for everyone who suffered in silence. And, with Anna by his side, he knew they could continue fighting for a fairer future, where human dignity was always the priority.